Editor and the global lead for the Conversations program. For this panel, Museums and Transgression, I'm delighted to welcome on stage Emma Lavigne, the head of the Pinault collection here in Paris, Manuel Segade, the director of Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid, and the panel will be moderated by co-curators of the Conversations program, Teyssou and Pierre-Alexandre Mateos. Thank you very much. A couple of housekeeping notes. Please switch off your phones. This conversation will be only in English, and unfortunately we won't be able to take questions at the end. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Colin, for this introduction, and welcome everyone to a talk on museum and transgression. We are delighted, thrilled to welcome two unique figures in the art world, namely Emma Lavigne and Manuel Segade, respectively head of Pinault collection and the director of Reina Sofia. They need little introduction, but I think it would be interesting to have a brief recap of their past transgression in order to prepare for what's coming next. One does not born transgressor, but learns to be one, as Emma Lavigne's intellectual upbringing teaches us. Already as a student, she decided to go to the École du Louvre, the same museum that Cézanne wanted to burn to the ground. But her first encounter with transgression started when she was 5 years old, and she discovered Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Subversive figure par excellence, it will be crucial to her vision when she was curator a few decades later at the Cité de la Musique in 2000. This position will be the first step of a skyrocketing career that will lead her to the Centre Pompidou in Paris as a curator, then director of Centre Pompidou in West, then director of Palais Tokyo, and now at the helm of the Pinault collection. Inspired by Olympian figures such as Raymond Queneau or Fluxus darlings such as John Cage, she always thought of museum as an open system, breaking its linear routine in order to inoculate alterity and accidental encounters in this well-oiled machine. In parallel to that, she championed extreme bodily representation in which patriarchal or institutional violence are made flesh by exhibiting artists such as Rebecca Horn, Annie Moff, Miriam Kahn, and Lilo Zano. Manuel Segade has also sailed all the seas of transgression. He knew all too well that in order to subvert institutions, you first have to experience them intimately. That is why he started his intellectual journey in one of its epicenters, a city that hosts the institution of all institutions, Santiago de Compostela. From there, he soon embarked into the exploration of modernity's eccentric and intoxicated figures in his book Narcissus, End of Century, through Alfred Jarry Opium Experiment, Kraft Ebing's Secret Gallery of Sexual Monsters, or Papus' Magic Rituals. He became then a curator at the Galician Center of Contemporary Art, still in Santiago de Compostela, before being seduced by the irresistible siren songs of independent curating. He will carry out projects for the Joan Miró and Cádiz Foundation, Biennale de Cuenca, the 2017 Spanish Pavilion, and many more. He was appointed director of the Centro Arte de Mayo in 2015, where he first implemented his singular museal vision, a museum for, by, and through the body, a museum of energies that does not reify knowledge, but reveal its most incandescent, fragile, and transgressive facets. In June 2023, he brought his iconoclast vision to the Museo Reina Sofia as its director. Please join me in welcoming our guest with a second warm round of applause. To give you a bit of context of how this discussion came to birth, how we thought about it, with Pierre, we went to Slovakia in spring, summer, and while we were there for a show, the head of the museum was fired because she promoted, quote-unquote, queer propaganda and foreign artists. And we thought that we should not take for granted the idea that museums are transgressive or like radical form of subjectivities. With Pierre, we defend a museum not for the hegemonic and conservative narrative, but a museum where the weird, obscene, abject, discarded, camp, amoral, jaded, tired, evil, non-conforming, and accidental can be discussed. This museum has existed many times throughout history and has had many names and forms. Here are just a few. The Temple of Friendship, founded by Nathalie Clifford Barnet, a lesbian Xanadu for début de siècle pulp author located Rue Jacob in Paris. The mind of Kateb Yassine, who understood that the first institution to be raided was language itself. He considered French as his war treasure. The unofficial museum manifesto of writer Itziar Stega, Becoming Whore, that can be understood as the queer and antithetic version of the late 18th century Claude Nicolas Ledoux Museum of Vice for the straight man elite. The display by Fernanda Wittgens of Pablo Picasso Guernicas in the Palazzo Real in Milan. The museum was still carrying the visible scars of the Second World War, thus proving that museum too can bleed. The Situationist Kids playground created by Palle Nielsen, which finally freed them from the boredom of the adult world in which they are entrapped. The Museum of Accidents by Paul Virilio, a museum to exhibit all accidents, from the most banal to the most tragic, from natural disaster to industrial catastrophes, but also the happy accident, from a stroke of luck to love at first sight. The Holy Rollover, a circus museum by John Cage, or the project of transforming the institution into a semantic collision machine. And finally, the sweating corridor of the famous Berlin BDSM sex club, The Laboratory, when Jan White exhibited the hairy hand of Richard Serra, featured next to a leather sling, thus shining a new light on an entire career in one potent gesture. Now, let's dive into our conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's start. I will start to talk about the transgressing role of the museum. Centuries ago, museums were fortresses for the elite and the intelligentsia. What was transgressive for museums was to be educational tools that made knowledge and art accessible for the largest audience. That's what was transgressive. In the current context, of course, that have been validated, and now education is ambiguous, has an ambiguous dimension. On m'entend ou pas? What is for you the transgressive definition of the museum and its role in the current context? Yeah, you're going to start.
As you want.
After all this amazing... can you hear me? No, okay. I think the question of education and sharing knowledge and making the museums accessible places is still one of the main priority in our work. The question of cultural democratization are still something urgent. And a lot of museums, I think we are partly, all of us, a part of this big race to accumulate more and more visitors in our museums. And so sometimes the number of visitors let us forgiven that, in fact, what we want also to do is to enlarge the audience for museums. I can tell you it was a disaster because, in fact, the Palais de Tokyo has been closed with the pandemic for many months. But the project for the Palais de Tokyo, and also in a way for the Bourse de Commerce, to me, is this question of open museum. But openness means a lot. Openness between the visitors, where are they coming from, openness to inclusivity, openness of the architectural structure itself, and I think you're going to talk about this aspect, openness between all the disciplinarities that a museum can welcome. It's always, I grew up at and with the Centre Pompidou for something like 11 years, and of course, the ideas behind, and the one from Pontus Hultén, a museum where life will explode, where something is happening all the time, very close to John Cage, spirit, a mouvement, like Francis Ponge expressed. This has been something absolutely very, very important in my background, but it's also interesting to see how much it's complex to go back to these first ideas, and sometimes museums have to face so many challenges that they are going very far from the motifs of their birth, in fact. And so there is an endless dialogue between what is about palimpsest museums, how can we manage to open up the museum with all these levels of ideas and wishes and urgencies as well. But an open museum will be for me the most transgressive wish for the museum.
What about you, Manuel? What will be your model of transgressive museum?
I really don't think that the museums define transgression.
Yeah.
I think it's not an institutional definition, it's something that comes from outside. So for me, the transgression is not even in the side of the audiences, is something that the artists provoke, like it's an institutional challenge.
But for example, like a museum without a wall, or a museum not as an institution but as a practice. I think you said a museum not as a noun but as a verb. That could be, for example, a way to be transgressive.
When you think of the museums from the beginning, and the Knighted Museum from the 18th century, when they were born, they were already defining museums as a for example, there's a definition that I really like that says a museum is a place where society becomes transparent to itself. And I think it's precisely through things that the museum absorbs that society becomes transparent to itself. And I think this transgression is always in the side of the artists that precisely provoke a movement inside the institution through their practices. I think it's always the effect of something that is shown, of something that is produced, of a flow in between, the museum institutional discourse and what is offered to the audience, but it arrives at the audience experience of the museum itself.
So could we think of the relationship between the artist and the institution as a kind of sadomasochistic relationship?
No, not at all. But I think it's a negotiation, and it's like if you think about all human relations as a domestic relation, that is a possible opinion. Maybe it is, but really the relations in between an institution and artists are exactly as the relations in between people and people. You know what I mean? So this is the way to articulate, and it's not about that relation, but what the audiences receive from there. You know what I mean? Like in the sense of a material culture that is offered.
Maybe it's people from people, but public and private institutions are extremely monitored and filtered from the symbolic power of the institution itself. That can be dissuasive to the security check at the entrance, the ticket price, the museum guards. It seems like all bodies operate in a regime of surveillance in the museum. To avoid this filtering of bodies, you have talked about a concept, Manuel Segade, called law institution. Maybe you can expand on that. What is a law institution?
Means to lower, really is a low institutionality. So it's like to lower the institutional model that we receive. No? For example, here, you are an audience that receives whatever we say. Like precisely it's a transparent model where you are there to receive. Like the organization, architectonical organization for an auditorium is exactly an institutional perfect model. We are here, the figures of authority that are going to transmit and you're going to receive. You know what I mean? Like sorry, I lost myself with the
law institution.
But the way to lower this sensation, this space that we are, should be, for example, to bring the people to sit here with us, and like in the Shakespearean theater.
I think you organize a picnic.
Precisely, in the sense, precisely to lower and put all dialogues in common, leave the microphones and maybe shout to each other whatever we need, and that is already a model that completely changes. No, like here, I think you made a reservation, no, to be audiences. You book it, no?
Free entrance.
No, but this book it. Like already is a filter. It's something that you need to make. So for example, when I arrived to the museum in Madrid, Reina Sofia, we have an entrance that is like an airport in the sense of security. You need to take some clothes out, you need to take the bags out and whatever. So it's not kind, it's difficult and provokes a kind of a different response that, for example, when you go to a mall, if a mall is a better experience than to enter a museum of contemporary art, maybe we're not doing properly, our function as public institutions, I guess. So this is about this, about the protocols of access, and how we warranty this access and make it as easy as any other place where we want to receive pleasure in a way, and at the same time, to really transform all the layers of institutionality, even the relationships with the artists, to make them, softer and easier in a way. So more natural, more organic.
I think one of the first transgression when you're a museum director is because the building itself, its architecture, is past, is often bearing a lot of historical weight, to say the least, and it can be set in a jail, in an hospital, or in a chamber of commerce. And for your two institutions, the kind of the spatial condition is really striking. I mean, it really shapes the way you experience the museum. Maybe could you tell us more of this palimpsest of institution and how you, navigate, negotiate with it, maybe transgress it in a way?
It's a very, very important question. For me, museum is the place where the bodies of the audience is meeting the body of the works, the organicity of the work of art, of the exhibition. And so it's really an encounter. And in this encounter, the relationship to the space is really something very important. I started working in two museums, the Pompidou and the Pompidou in Metz, made by famous architect and great architect. But it was something very interesting to arrive at the Palais de Tokyo and to understand the project of the renovation or the architecture renovation, very close to Gordon Mataclar, proposed by Lacaton and Basel. And even if it has been a short stay there, it was really something very interesting to understand how contemporary art could find races in this building built in 1937 during, also for an international exhibition, universal exhibition, in a completely anachronic architecture in the middle of the modernity. Can you believe that Le Corbusier, Mallet Stevens took part to the jury? And finally, we had this kind of monstrosity. And it was very interesting to start working with the layers and that space as a palimpsest with, it has been controversial, but with Anne Imhoff and Miriam Khan, who are the two first artists I have invited to take over the whole building in its DNA, was a kind of exorcism also to let people know that in fact this great place that I am still in love with has been also the place where the collection of the National Museum of Art opened in 1942 during the Second World War, and at the same time where the masterpiece of modern art has been exhibited downstairs. It was the place for all the Jewish spoiled pianos and artworks. So the two layers in the same time was something very, very strong. At the Bourse de Commerce, the challenge is also very interesting because I don't want to tell all the story of the Bourse de Commerce, but it's interesting to know that the context of the museum was also quite important to organize this Arte Povera show, which is on view now. Former Palazzo by Catherine de Médicis, where she had an observatory column to look at the sky, which was quite unusual at that time and very connected to the spirit of some artists like Giovanni Anselmo or others. And then the place where the grains, the storage for the grains, because it was the huge market in Paris, and then the stock exchange, which is very interesting, very complex, because as you know, this building has been made for another international exhibition in 1989. And sometimes we discuss with American museums directors, they said, oh, it's so complex to let accessible the huge painting which covered the sky dome of the Bourse de Commerce. In United States, it's too touchy, and we would have rather recovered it with a white or black top. And I think this is something very interesting, and almost all the program is also made when artists are keen to do it in dialogue or in resistance to the very complex history and the fact that this building has been made during the Third Republic at the time of commercial and colonial expansion of France. And all the vitrines were also places where products from these large and largest France have been exhibited. So it's very complex, but it's absolutely very interesting to work with all these layers of history. Two examples.
You're also linked to a pen and paste of institution as the Reina Sofia.
We have also the same thing. I mean, even much more complex in the sense because we have several buildings. Two of them are palaces, pavilions in the Retiro Park, you know, in a royal park, and these two, for example, were made for international exhibitions too, but made, for example, to exhibit plants from our colonies in Philippines, for example, and even to show human zoos. So you know, have this colonial horrible memory. And the building of the main building of the museum, you know, the headquarters, is a hospital founded in the end of the 16th century. So you can imagine, you know, like all the tradition that goes, you know, for the royal foundation in the moment of the imperial period of Spain. And, you know, like the craziness of it is that, you know, like in a moment, the museum began to speak about itself like you know, this tradition of the hospital as a caring tradition, you know, like so it's like the caring museum, and you know, like I think when I'm inside, I think mostly about 400 years of exclusionary practice over the bodies of people. You know, in that place, the decisions were taken about whose body needs to be saved, whose life needs to be saved, whose illness, you know, I don't know, women that doesn't need to be, you know, like I mean, we know history of medicine in the last century, so I think it's incredibly interesting at the same time. But there are a lot of different layers that are also interesting in a museum like ours, for example, as a national institution, that, for example, deal with the collection. And, for example, we have inside the collection of the museum, the collection of the Franco Contemporary Art Museum, which is, of course, really interesting as another layer of this palimpsest. And, you know, like as we have the image right now, I think it's really interesting, this one, because this is a picnic in the garden of the cloister of the old hospital. We have pieces of Calder and Dan Graham, whatever, and this is a picnic that we make annually with the situated museum that is an assembly of different communities surrounding the museum in you know, migrant communities like these Bangladeshi people that you see there. And it's funny because you see this publica, you see, it's like a public there in the, and this is because, you know, like in every of these picnics, they make, you know, like it's a party, but it's a political party, and they claim the things they need. And for example, these migrants are claiming for a public health system for everybody, you know, even for the migrants. And it's funny because it's done in a whole hospital founded 400 years ago. You know, like so, you know, these layers are like a part of the porosity of the museum. And you know, like this was the first year I arrived last year, and was a month after I arrived, so it was organized before, of course. And they called this act, you know, the picnic, to make a hole through the museum. So it was precisely this porosity between the outside and the inside, because they got 5 years ago the permission to use this park as a public park, because there is no public park in the neighborhood. And you know, like so we can let these people to go, but neighbors to come inside the museum, not you know, paying an entrance, not going up to see the art, but just using the park as a public park, which I think is really interesting. And it's on the museum, you have something that doesn't belong to the museum and belongs to the people in a sense, no?
Yeah, completely. And speaking of which, I mean, we just like mentioned the transgression of the building, its past, its like history. But then you push like the transgression of the museum to its like organization, and we have like two interesting images, which are the two organigrams of the institution before, after. So I mean, we can see like a clear difference. I say, like the day and night. And so maybe could you tell us what was the impulse? I mean, what does it correspond to in terms of organization? Because we see it's obviously less vertical and much more tentacular, with maybe zones of shadow that are not under your like directorship.
I mean, it's exactly, you know, you were talking these days with me about Yayo Herrero, you know, like about ecofeminism and this Spanish tradition. And you know, like I always conceived any institution I'm working with or in as bodies. You know, they're alive, and sometimes it's just a choreography, much more complex, it's a choreography of different alive bodies all together. And in this sense, you know, in Sofia, we are 520 people working there, so it's big. And you know, like big buildings, separate institutions inside the museum itself, foundations that support us, whatever. So, you know, we needed to find a kind of I needed, you know, like to design an ecosystem that seemed to be alive. You know, the other one seems like different organisms. It's like I see three different bodies there, you know, like living separately and not really communicating to each other. And the other one is precisely an interdependent system where things can be alive. You know, it's like you know, like the need of an ecosystem to survive, to produce life, is precisely this condition of interdependency. You know, where nothing is outside another thing. And if you put then the other one, that I don't know if you have it there, the hand with that one. You know, this for me is the most important thing I can show you ever in any lecture. It's the most banal thing. It's corrugated cardboard. So it's like you know, this is the thing that sustains all the logistics of the world, the Amazonization of the world, you know, that we know right now clearly. And at the same time, you know, like this is what I think as gestors, you know, like as managers, we need to do in our cultural institutions, you know, not precisely to fulfill a kind of a structure, but to make holes in it, like these people were saying from outside. You know, like what makes resistant this kind of cardboard is 3 layers of paper that are exactly the same, that if you took them like this and you try to hold I don't know, a tray, and nothing works, you know, like it falls down, it's gonna not be supportive, but you know, you have more formation in architecture than me. But when you have this zigzag structure inside, then you provoke a resistance that suddenly is different. And this resistance is provoked because there are boundary voids in the middle of the structure. So if you go back to the structure of the museum, we need to find these empty spaces that precisely, and as a lot of theoreticians like Brian Masumi that are thinking about affects, you know, like this is the spaces in between a grid are full precisely with affection. So if we want to deal with a human system producing an institution and with the things that come from outside, really you need to provoke these spaces in the middle, these boundaries, this, how do you call it in how do you call it in biology, interstices.
Yeah.
You know, like interstitial spaces that really are not just empty spaces, are spaces like the ones I have in between my lungs and my heart right now when I'm speaking, that precisely allow that these different functions of my organs are working together. You know what I mean? So this is what we are trying to provoke right now, and you know, we just started with this system, and let's see how it works.
You mentioned resistance. I wanted maybe to talk about like art as a transgression. Historically, art institutions have assumed a sort of legal extraterritoriality, a place where regular norm, even sometimes law, don't apply for the sake of artistic experimentation. Do you think institutions should enjoy some type of artistic freedom going beyond certain regulation and experience that are usually prohibited in public places? I'm talking, for example, about like the experiment with drug experience, with naked performance, with tradition of a transgressive art that is less and less present in institutions. Do you think institutions could assume a sort of extraterritoriality? To repeat my question.
Emma?
any kind of transgression, even if they want and they are open to that. But sometimes, just in my case, I started as a curator, and my first show as a support censorship, and so I decided step by step that in fact it's not a question of power, but to be sure that I can do the project I want to do with artists. The best way was to become a director. It's not only the power, it's just the power of doing, the power of taking the right decision. Okay, let's go, we start. Exhibition, art are processes and not objects that we can just hang on the wall. And so I must confess that I think, in fact, all my life has been like a battle for artists and art. I'm sorry, and with wonderful teams as well. But it's very sad in a way. I think this is something we need to think about. I mean, just one example, for the Pierre-Alexandre retrospective, I dislike this expression, but when he has been invited at the Centre Pompidou, he said, I don't care about having a retrospective at the Centre Pompidou. What does it mean to do a retrospective? It's a nonsense. I prefer to have a compost or a garden or destroy a jail or who knows. And so it has been very interesting also to respect the memory of the artist when he was a child visiting the Centre Pompidou. This is a very interesting photo for that, not only because it's very beautiful, because it's not the subject, is the fact that before that space in front, what we call the Galerie Sud, in front the Café Coste, was an entrance to enter the Centre Pompidou. The Centre Pompidou, it was possible, like the Tate, to go through the building. And it has been closed for all the reasons you mentioned, like in many aéroport museums. We are all... And the idea was not to put any penny on the scenography of the exhibition, and we reused the walls of the former Mike Kelly exhibition. It was a nonsense to build anything, any kind of walls. And we decided to build the walls only to protect, let's say, and to create a new space outside the museum. So suddenly it was something very important to have this notion of Umwelt, the fact that in the exhibition, human beings, the dog, human, the bees, the spiders, all the insects, all the different climates will be together, but without this very tiny extension, it would have been impossible to do the show. It would have been like a nonsense. So I think this is just an example, but even when an institution invites an artist, we have to deal with transgression all the time. And it's very complex now for artists because exhibitions are not only, of course, but like products. And so we need to negotiate, as you said, with a lot of parameters. But sometimes it's good to be ready for a real fight. And this was one of the...
But I think it's really interesting because we'll speak about like two types of transgression. So, I mean, there's like blasphematory or moral transgression, of course, but this is mainly another type of transgression because we could think that maybe the most transgressive act within a museum condition is like to let entropy. You said like, for example, with like the Reina Sofia, este museo le falta la calle, or, to kind of let life inside, or, the kind of regime of living inside the museum, which is mainly an institution, that came to fruition in the 19th century with like the rational philosophy, Enlightenment, the idea of building category of life, ordering things, compartmentalizing things. So maybe you could give us a bit of insight on, because both of you were interested in, having life inside the museum, either natural life or just like social life, and let, the museum breathe, be like the kind of continuum between the street and the museum.
But I mean, there are a lot of things there, really complicated. But every time I try to speak about museums of contemporary art, that is what we are dealing with, no? That is a different subject too. I always say that we don't keep objects from the past. You know, we are not dealing with stones that doesn't speak anymore. That we need really to agitate them to make them tell something, you know what I mean? Like applied science or, no, we're dealing with objects that normally are material culture or immaterial culture that comes from artists that are alive, that are still speaking. These things are speaking about problems and issues of society that are recent, that, you know, if it's not ours, it's our parents or our grandparents that we're still dealing with, you know? So, I mean, we tend to forget this difference, you know, and we tend to think that our museums are like the traditional museums, but they are not from the beginning. Since already in the 60s, all our regime changed. You know, like it's not, for example, that our museums suddenly, in the last years, because of political agendas, became feminist. Is that contemporary art, when it was born in the 60s, you know, like lived a revolution at the same time of the second wave of feminism, internationally speaking, and suddenly, for example, the women put their body there to make performances, for example, and to start another kind of point of view in the use of, you know, a life art in our realm. Or, for example, it's the same moment when, you know, the conceptual art practices arrive. It's the same moment of a Stonewall, there's a LGTB revolt, is the same moment of May '68, a revolt against class, is the same moment of the last falling of European empires and the freedom of the countries of the South in that very moment that provoke movements of the demographic movements that compose our societies in Europe and the rest of the world right now, you know, more ethnicity diverse, etc. You know, like and of course that provoke other problems. But you know, like if we agree that our regime after modernism is born, you know, this contemporary cultural pattern starts in a moment in the 60s. So precisely we continue to be there. So, you know, these things that we deal with, they are continuously speaking about these issues and putting them in the center of our institutions. So it's not just Manuel decided that the institution is a body. No, the bodies were there already. And the thing that for me is really meaningful in that sense is that what we make with these bodies in the future. When you're talking, for example, about the limits of an institution, even legally speaking, it's like they depend on the artistic practices. You know, like that they are also a revolt in a sense. You know, like we are dealing all the time. If we were, I mean, Louvre is a realistic, perfect novel of the 19th century. Amazing. You know, like L'Education Sentimentale. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like incredible. But Reina Sofia or Pompidou or La Bourse should be, I don't know, a speculative fiction of Ballard, for example, dealing with things that we don't know what will be in the future. Every time Emma or me, no, or US curators are producing something with an artist then in 3 years. I hope we have this kind of times all the time. But you know, like when you're producing something, you don't know what this artist will produce and will need from the institution. Maybe it's twisting everything upside down. Maybe it's even something that is not possible to do. You know what I mean? Like you were working with people, precisely Animov or Pierre, or you know, like precisely were producing things that were transforming the institution itself and producing a structural change. So you know, for me, this is why I was putting the transgression in the sense of the artists.
Talking about transgression, we can't escape this question. I think is the question of the audience, and if the audience can be offended when the audience is offended by transgression. Offending is an interesting word because it shares an etymology with a religious order. Art can be shocking and offensive, brutal, weak to a certain degree in order to raise consciousness around certain topic or not. It's not an obligation. Do you think museums should protect the right for artists to offend, and if so, why?
The problem is that they don't want necessarily to offend.
We have a good example with Miriam Khan, for example.
They don't want to offend, they just want to share their vision. And it's very important. I don't want to spend too much time about the last show I made at the Palais de Tokyo, which was a bit a disaster, let's say, because the title in itself was Ma pensée sérielle. It was about the fact that for Miriam, she paints one painting in 2 or 3 hours, There is not at all any kind of decision of what is a beautiful painting or bad one. It's just the rhythm of her body, like a choreography, which will impulse the show and the movement. And as a co-curator of that show with Marta Levenska, in fact, we are with the artist, but we try to follow the movement of her mind, of her bodies, and of course we are in the field of contemporary art. At the same time, we had a show about an adaptation of the book Ce que le sida m'a fait from Elisabeth Lebovici in a contemporary art center. So I thought we will not communicate necessarily about please come with your kids. I mean, it was more two very strong exhibitions. And it's very interesting to see how much the fact that these older, in a way, and greater artists who started to do graffiti very close to the Palais de Tokyo when she was young, to imagine that in 2023, such a censorship is possible, not from the institution at all, but suddenly to hear the fact that her work is connected, is like entartete Kunst, art dégénéré, or it's really something absolutely amazing. And Miriam, she's just paying attention to images that are everywhere in the news, on the screen, and so suddenly the fact that a female artist, can have her own idea about what she's doing, what she's painting, was no more possible. It was just, we have decided that it's pedocriminality, pedocrime, let's say, and suddenly she became a pedocriminal, and there was a judgment, and it was just an allegory of the power between the force and the weakness of the people, and a direct comment on Bucha. To me, sorry, but it's a bit like Guernica in a way. In a way, the way she also composed many images, like a wall. It's like such a strong statement. I don't know so many artists able, en temps réel, in real time, to have such a statement and a strong comments. So it's like if museum or contemporary art center, in that case, should continue to be place for very archaical models and idea of beauty and idea of rationalism. And I think it's very terrible. And the statue of the bodies, it could be the life body, dance performances, but also representation of the body, is probably the most strong transgression ever, because even artists who had several exhibitions, like Egon Schiele or other, soon it will be impossible to just exhibit naked body and don't talk about sexuality, because
it's all about
it's no more possible.
Like self-censorship, because I think that will be a little bit the last point. Censorship is a really complex notion, because historically it comes from conservative. Now it's a bit more complex. It's a moral duty is also used by the left, and so it's a bit more ambivalent. And it talks about like political surveillance and also control of bodies again. But it is also the question of self-censorship as a curator, or you control yourself with the subject you touch, because you don't want a hostile campaign, or you don't want vandalism.
I don't want to take too much time, but I'm sure. But just to tell you that I think it's really urgent to continue to exhibit art with very organic meanings for the body. After the pandemic, at the Palais de Tokyo, the curatorial team made a great show which just exists 5 days, antibodies, how can we continue to be together in the sense of what Jacques Rancière called partage du sensible, sensible sharing, because it's an amazing experience. We are coming with your mind, but with your eyes and with your bodies in an exhibition. And I think there is something urgent, even if I can tell you that I welcome a great show made by the Pinacoteca Agnelli. We have a lot of pieces in the collection, and I was a bit afraid after Marianne Kahn. It was just a few months after, and I thought, I'm going to start doing shows about abstraction, because it was really a huge responsibility from outside, but also from outside. People from the team are shocked by all this kind of paintings. So I promise in a couple of months you will have at the Bourse de Commerce
Manuel, how do you deal with self-censorship?
I think, you know, I mean, I'm talking from a public institution. We were speaking before about something in the private realm, but, you know, like at least in Spain, maybe we don't have so many private institutions as advanced as La Bourse, you know, in the sense of what they're showing. But, you know, like I think the commitment of a public institution should be precisely to do all those things that cannot happen in the private realm. You know what I mean? Should be the warranty precisely of experimentation, of doing things that maybe doesn't produce blockbusters, you know, like dealing with a lot of audiences, precisely because should warranty the advancement of this contemporary culture in the public arena. You know what I mean? Guarantee the access of audiences to precisely this kind of things that cannot happen in other places, you know? So in this sense, also, I think one incredibly meaningful thing that culture does in the present should be, or should do in the present, should be preserve complexity. You know, like I think it's an incredibly meaningful thing. It's really stupid, but at the end we are seeing political visions in the streets, in Twitter, well, Twitter X, whatever, right now, that precisely get back to a moment, maybe really from the 18th century, where the definitions of things were clear. This is a vase, and it's this one. There is no other kind of glass possible. There is, I don't know if this is a table or a stool. You know what I mean? Like, I love this ambiguity. We are in a world of ambiguities. And you know, to preserve these complexities of the objects of the world, of the relationships between people, of the, you know, like to multiply the subjective positions possible and to kill identities, sorry to say it so roughly, I think it's a commitment of contemporary culture. Maybe we are losing the contemporary world and we are entering another realm of culture and we're in a posthumous position for the contemporary, but that was the contemporary was about, and I'm committed with that as a museum of contemporary art. And until, you know, like I don't see a new regime that maybe goes back to the past and to moments that we are not so interested in, you know, like, but you know, I remember talking with an artist years ago, a French artist, that he showed me, for example, how as a queer person, he felt that precisely being compelled to doing art and to be in the world of the contemporary culture in the moment information was precisely the only place it was feeling safe, you know, like safe in the sense of his genders, and I think this is a really meaningful thing, you know, like we allow certain positions of life to happen. This happened to my body too, and I think it's something that our museums should do for the rest of the people. So, you know, we are in democracies that are precisely a multiplication of different minorities. We know there are not majorities anymore, at least in Europe. So I think it should be credited in our institutions to open up the discourses, to have all these possible positions, even the ones we don't like so much, I think is important. And the thing, for me, is not what you can forbid or censor, is how you contextualize everything in it. You know, that I think this is this mediation is the process. That, of course, the museum should be a dialogue with society and with these communities, not to do it alone. That is the next step, no? And the complicated step for big institutions as mine, for example.
As a conclusive question, what would be your advice for the new generation of museum transgressor?
I think they should invent new institutions, perhaps. We need to reinvent the model of what is a museum, not only in terms of architectural, but I don't know. I think new kind of project can also be invented, like kind of cooperative, especially for contemporary art, where artists, curators could be together. I think this is something important to imagine that a museum with all the layers of this palimpsest institution, we can have the freedom also to reinvent something. And what I think also very important, because museums, the birth of museum is also connected to the philosophie des Lumières and all the rationalism. And I feel that now we are in a very complex political and cultural situation. So I think it's also very important to accept that museums are not only places with a lot of explanation on everything, but could be more places for shadows, to things that we don't know exactly, to ask questions, and to continue to be inspired by the artist. I think this is, to me, the most important challenge.
Thank you. Manuel?
I agree. It's exactly the same. It's like to apply the radical imagination of the artists and continue to think out of the box and see what comes. You know, but it's like I will tell them also, be ready.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What a wonderful conclusion.